This is Center Stage, putting your firm in the spotlight by highlighting business owners and other industry experts to help take your firm to the next level. Hey everyone, and welcome to Center Stage. I'm your host, John Hinson, and this week we are talking about how to find the right partner for your marketing. And we're going to talk about, we've talked a lot about before how you as the firm owner should not be doing it yourself. You should be doing the thing that you went to school for, or that, you are known for or getting paid for, not all of this other stuff. But how do you actually figure out who you're going to work with? And I promise this is not going to be like a 30-minute sales pitch for why you should work with Spotlight Branding or anybody else. I want to help you make the most informed decision that you can and what makes the most sense for you. So that is why I am joined by Josh Ramsey. He does a lot of fractional CMO work. He's helped all kinds of businesses with their marketing, and I'm excited for him to be here. So Josh, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Looking forward to the chat.
Absolutely. So yeah, I gave like the bare bones kind of intro there. Tell us a little bit more about what you do and some of the experiences that you had.
Yeah, so again, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I love sharing the message because most people are not understanding or even aware that a fractional CMO exists. People understand the concept of a marketing strategist and they understand a marketing consultant. But oftentimes a marketing strategist or consultant is someone that's just going to say, go do this or go do that. But a fractional CMO is really meant to get their hands dirty, to not only give the vision, but to put their hands on it, put their fingerprints on it on behalf of the CEO. So it's someone that sits at the executive table, gives the vision, but then gives the vision based on the CEO's dream, and then executes or makes sure that the execution is done. Now, that doesn't mean, this is also clear to understand, it doesn't mean that they're going to build your website. A fractional CMO understands how a website should be built and the structure of the marketing system and gives the vision, but doesn't do it. Will you indulge me on one quick story on the explanation?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, I literally just finished an email this morning to one of my clients, and I have a marketing team that reports to me. And the conversation I had this morning with the client, if I back out for just a second and explain the client, they have something good to say, but they don't say it well, but they try to say it often. So it's have something good to say it well, and say it often. The conundrum that they're in is the storytelling. It's the explanation of what they do well and explaining it to the audience that they want to reach. It's easy to say it often once you have a good strategic message. So this morning, one of the initiatives that I've started was our operators came up with a solution on a problem. I outlined the vision of how our marketing project managers need to clearly communicate that. And then I'm training them and teaching them, this is how you weave a story. So this is what the operators did. Here's how we define that. Here's how we engage that into a storyline. And then it's easy to, again, communicate it. There's all sorts of, various, as I call it, tactical marketing outlets to speak your message to. But if you're not engaging enough and you don't have a good storytelling of what your inside reality is, that becomes a problem. So that's what a CMO does, is say, okay, we have something good and here's how we weave that story, give it to a team to weave it. I approve it as the CMO, and then we execute it. So maybe that kind of helps understand just a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, it's essentially kind of in the name, you are the chief marketing person, like you are handling everything. Doesn't mean that you're literally doing it all yourself, but you're facilitating and, making the decisions that the owner would otherwise have to do on their own.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's it.
Yeah. So, we're talking about marketing vendors because I think that's where a lot of people start, especially smaller businesses in trying to get some of that marketing help. So what, especially, you maybe even work with some vendors or vet some vendors as a CMO. What are some of the biggest frustrations that you've seen business owners or even you have had with marketing vendors? And I promise I won't get offended by anything you say.
Well, thanks for not getting offended. Um, but you know what I mean? I never mean to offend, but one thing about myself, at least, in understanding myself, because psychology is a big part of marketing. It's
Yeah.
understanding the human nature, why we buy what we buy. And ultimately, if I just broke that down, no matter what you sell, there are three levels that a business owner needs to understand. And this kind of leads into hiring the right marketing person or agency vendor. And it starts with benefits of ownership, objections to that ownership, and then vendor selection. And too often we sell on price, not quality of overcoming the objections and explaining the value, which is advantage. So everything that we buy, from a stick of gum, bottle of water, to a Ferrari, it's all wrapped into those decision making that we make. So
Yeah.
I think the first part is expectations when we hire somebody, both employees in-house and also vendors. Oftentimes I see it that there's not a clear expectation and what I often refer to as the KPI, a key point indicator. That
Yeah.
way, the benchmark is set and we all know what has to be done. Now, a lot of people will hire myself as a fractional CMO to make sure we set the right KPI and that it's not dictated by the agency alone.
Yes.
So having the right expectations is very important as I work on the inside of a company and look at the agency. So I would look at you and say, okay, what do you see that needs to be done? I love and value people's opinion. Now, I go off of my confirmation bias of, is that opinion right or wrong? Now, I love some conversations that we had of build the foundation first. So when you come to me and who would be my CEO, and you said that to me, I would say, absolutely, like build that foundation. Now, where we might disagree is what is the foundation, right? But now that's a finer point that most CEOs don't know. They just love the buzzword. That's where I come in and say, look, let's set the KPI of what is the foundation and what is the right timeline to meet that foundation, right?
Yeah.
And then that second leads into the expectation of budget. So now when you are pouring a budget into it, when should your expectation or your KPI be met and associated with your budget? You know, so I mean, I can go down a budget strategy if you'd like, but that, again, trying to keep it high level for our short podcast here,
Yeah.
that's kind of the two top things there.
Yeah. And I love that you talked about, making sure that the vendor doesn't dictate the expectation, right? Because I think, something that I see a lot, and I think what frustrates a lot of people is they go work with like a PPC vendor, for example, a Google Ads vendor, and they'll say, yeah, we'll get you 100 leads a month. And, you know, you get started and maybe
But
you do get 100 leads a month, but 98 of them are junk and they're not even relevant. And then you
yeah,
go to the thing and you're like, you're not producing what I said. And they're like, yeah, we got you 100 leads per month. We're doing exactly what we said we were going to do.
I'll give you two quick stories on that because I love that you say that and you're dead right. I've one guy that just hired me, and I literally have a call later today with his ad agency. And what he already told me as I went through the discovery process is that his vendor, the agency that he hired, he's paying over $4,000 a month to. Now, for his small business, relatively small business, that's a big chunk, but he's
Mhm.
looking at it as this is an investment. So when we
That's
look at
good.
it, what I'm here to do is get the maximum potential out of that ad agency. So in discovery, he's getting phone calls from people looking for information on a project that's already started. But he's showing up in pay per click for things like Home Depot. And he's a remodeler. And he's going, you've already started this project. You're not a valid lead. So he calls the agency. And the agency casted such a wide net that they burned through his budget in 2 weeks that was meant to be 4 weeks. And he got nothing from it. Well, I'll give you another quick story. Well, so on that one, to wrap that up, we're having a discussion today to fix that and to modify and manage his budget better. Now, I'll give you another
Yeah.
quick story. I have a client who I have an ad agency, and my agency was generating leads for him. And the problem became he quickly bounced back and said, hey, you generated all these leads. You got 15 in 1 week. This is great, but they're all crap. And I said, okay, explain to me why, right? Because now
Yeah.
it's setting the clear expectation of the the value of a lead of why is it garbage, right? I'm cool with saying, hey, I produce garbage. But if there's no communication, now the expectation is unrealistic. Not trying to rhyme there,
Yeah.
but the expectation is unrealistic because there's no communication. That's why for myself, again, every client's different, but we use a CRM with agencies to get that information sharing where a business owner has to bounce back and say, this specifically is why it's bad. And
Yeah.
then any agency can work on that. Well, I say any, if they're an agency of value of of good ethics, morals, and values, they can fix that, right? But
Right.
that's some of the challenges that I know other business owners have faced. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, even we've faced it, right? Because we don't do any pay-per-click ads as a service. And so, but we wanted to market ourselves through that kind of channel. We worked with another agency, and their default was to maximize impressions and get the lowest click rate that they could. And that's kind of their default. That's how they help people. And we started seeing that like people were reaching out to us thinking that we were lawyers, because obviously like we do marketing for lawyers, but somehow people were reaching out to us thinking that we were lawyers. And so we're like, no, okay. And then we got to the point where we were like, look, we want to get really focused on this. We are totally okay with a higher click rate and lower
yeah.
impressions if those are just all being targeted to the right people, and they could not wrap their head around it. And so we just don't work with them anymore.
So can I speak to that just real quick?
Yeah.
What people fall into that they're not oftentimes aware of is what are called in AdWords, pay-per-click AdWords, is what's called search terms. And a search term, when you put in a keyword, you have three variables. You have broad match, exact match, and phrase match. Now I'm not going to go granular, right, for the sake of time here. But when you understand that you have a keyword and you have these three variables of how that search term is worked, and then you can see what people are actually typing in, that's where I would come in as a fractional CMO to you and say, let's look at our search terms. Look, like I don't disagree that we're going to pause and we need to change strategy. But this kind of goes into when you hire an agency, one of the top questions. So let me put a big exclamation point on this. Huge, massive, everyone hear me. Find out who their strategist is and what their experience is. Because agencies will hire pay-per-click managers and executors and designers. But when you comes to, let me simplify in a quick explanation. When you simplify this, it comes down to three brains that build a website or do marketing. You have design, think about the brain and the lifestyle of the designer. Then think about the coder who actually has to create what's going to happen. And too many times we stop there. But the third brain is super important. That's the strategist. And the strategist looks at it and goes, okay, logically, what was the disconnect in between all parties? And we go, oh, well, they were searching for, attorney law. Well, you showed up as marketing attorney law. Your search term wasn't set right. So then we go market as a negative, and we market as a negative keyword. Boom. We keep running the campaign. It just,
Yeah.
we took away the biggest sore spot rather than hurting the entire campaign. We took away one little sore spot that everyone's going, that's the pain point. And we say, don't kill the campaign, right? Don't kill the messenger, change the messenger's route, right? And get there a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about, setting expectations, right? And so what, and we've mentioned a couple of different things already. Are there any other specific questions that, business owners should be asking these vendors to make sure that they're getting on the same page and setting the proper expectations?
Yeah, that's a great question, but I'm going to be a little vague on this one. So
Yeah.
you first need to set your strategy and your vision internally before you work with an agency.
Yeah.
So an agency is meant to sell what they're good at, right? I mean, anyone listening to this or watching, you are meant to sell what you're good at. You're not going to say to a level, you're not going to say, oh, yeah, you should go do that instead of this. You're meant to sell what you're good at. In the marketing world, what a CMO does is it sits with the CEO and says, what are we good at? What are we trying to do? How do we want this to come in? And therefore, I help business owners dictate to the agency, this is what we should do. I mean, one of my offshoot campaigns that I'm trying right now is working with agencies to be their strategist. So I go under contract with them that I'm not going to go resell to another agency, but I'm going to work as the strategist and not be a fractional CMO. I'm going to be the CMO of an agency to be the lead strategist to say, here's what we do. And a lot of agencies are working with me on that because they don't have a strategist. They understand the problem here. So again, let's back out of that rabbit hole for a minute and come back to your question. The question being, what's the expectation? Well, you need to set that properly internally with your own KPIs, then interview. And just as a quick point of reference, we haven't chatted about it. We could talk about it as needed, but I published a book back in 2019. And the first chapter gives you 5 points on how to hire the right agency, how to set the right KPIs, how to interview an agency. And I kind of call it a manual or a guide that you keep in your back pocket. You've reviewed, then you ask a list of questions to the agency and you go back and see if they match your KPIs. And that's where, again, I try to be a little bit vague because everyone has their own problems. Everyone has their narrative, right? If you speak psychologically, we all have our narrative and burnt times, hurt times, pain times, and they're all going to be different for everybody. So that's why there is some ambiguity to that.
Yeah. And, you also probably think about like you said, like what's important to you, and again, just making sure that, you both have the same working definition of the results that you expect to have. One other thing that you mentioned, and I want to get this because we get this question a lot. You mentioned budget, a few minutes ago. Is there any sort of set guideline or recommendation in terms of like what percentage of your budget should be going to marketing, or is it one of those it depends sort of things?
So I use a law called law of diminishing return.
Mm.
And let me kind of give another quick story here.
Yeah.
And the story is of a garage door company. And they came to me. We were working together for several years. The full life cycle of most agencies with companies is about 18 months. The average that I work with is over 4 years. A lot of that I attribute to just being very blunt and honest, which some business owners don't like. They want to be told and patted on the back that they're right. And I'm just not that guy. I'm a very what you really want is money. We all do, right? Like that's why
Right.
we're in business, is to make money. So I look at business owners before we even get started and I say, look, do you want to make money or do you want to feel good about yourself? Right? Go feel good about yourself once you've made money. But back to my story with the business owner in the garage door company, they came to me. We were working for several years, and they came to me one day and they said, look, we turn off pay-per-click and our phones die. And we have business, but our phones die. And we turn on pay-per-click and we're spending all this money. We should cancel you, Josh, as SEO, and we should just do pay-per-click. Be done. And I said, okay, I don't disagree, but let's take some confirmation bias and look at the data, right? Let's be analytical about this. So long story short, after doing some quick research, it only took me about 2 or 3 days to pull all the numbers together and verify them. At the end of the day, they were right. Their volume of calls was way up on pay-per-click. They were spending, however, very important to know, they were spending $180 for a closed deal with pay-per-click. Now, that fit their margins, right? Like when we ran their gross profit margin, their cost, we ran all the numbers on the budgeting. And like I said, that's a whole nother story that I could walk through at another time. But when we walk through this number, 180 was still below their threshold of revenue that they could spend for a sale. If I recall right, it was about 250 was their top line. But when we looked at SEO was $50. Now, they were getting a smaller volume, less calls, but they were more qualified and they were selling at a better rate at 50. I could give this same story again and again in different industries and different things that we've done.
Yeah.
But here's the thing to understand: law of diminishing return. They said, well, Josh, can we get rid of the pay-per-click and spend it on SEO? And I said, law of diminishing return. No, because they were already spending about $2,500 a month on SEO. And I said, if anything, we need to start scaling that back because we've already reached the threshold, or we need to change from what we were doing and use a different type of SEO. Because again,
Yeah.
a lot of people don't understand there's different types of SEO. I mean, at the core, it's link building and it's content building, right? And those kind of
Yeah.
go together, but they are different. So that's the law of diminishing return that we have to be aware of. Is at some point you got what you got and you move on from it. And then as far as budget goes, I created something called the crystal ball of marketing, and it truly dictates exactly what you should spend and what you're going to make. And it's a beautiful mind type of tool that works 100% of the time. When you input the right data, it will output for you exactly what you need. Um, but I think that answers at least the beginning part
Yeah.
of your question, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think so many people get focused on just the hardline numbers that, it goes so much deeper than that because there's so many other things to take into consideration in terms of the different kinds of marketing that you're doing. Like you can't just put a blanket number over it, and expect that to go well. You got to really look deeper into it.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much to that, but you're right on with it. Yeah.
So on the other side of that, we talked a lot about vendors and, something that we see, is, a solo or small business. They will work with a vendor for a time, they will grow, and then they'll get to a certain kind of revenue number. And at some point, they'll kind of think like, okay, well, I'm spending this much on a vendor, which is more than the monthly cost of having someone in house. And then they'll bring that person in house. So, in your experience, is there a right time to bring marketing in house, to hire a full time or a part time person to handle it? Or what have you seen?
Yeah, that's such an absolute loaded question. And one thing that I've learned in my experience of doing conferences is that people sometimes take what I'm about to say and they take it as the holy grail. At least when I teach conferences, they do this, and then they do it, and then they call me 6 months or a year later, and then yell at me and say, "You lied. You're full of it." So I try to walk delicately about this. So if anyone comes to me later and says, or to you and says, your guest lied to me, let's take this as a grain of salt, right? Oftentimes we'll use trigger words where I'll say something like, red cup. And that means like, remember, red cup. I told you that this isn't the Holy Grail. There's things around it, right? But yeah, I mean, when to bring someone in versus keeping outsource, again, it's going to number one go to your strategy, right? Because if, especially if you've dedicated your time to pay per click, let's just say, and that's all you're going to do, then at some point to bring in a manager is going to be important. But then set the expectation: is the manager going to manage the agency, pay them a little less? Is the manager going to take over what the agency does? Make sure that they have the right qualifications, right? You need to look at case studies just like you would hire the agency. You need to look at what they've done. And let me talk about case studies real quick.
Yeah.
Start asking agencies for the worst case study. Ask them, who is your worst client and why? Right? I like to ask clients, how do I get fired? And they're like, what? Like, you're about to get hired. Why are you asking? Because then it's the expectation meets properly, where I know if I don't do this, I'm out the door, right?
Yeah.
But I would even reverse that when I hire people. How do you think you're going to get fired? Like, I'm hiring you, so I don't want to, right? But where is that expectation met? So again, when you bring someone in, setting the same thing, the KPI. What is the expectation? Tell them, this is what gets you fired. If you don't get this done, then I got to let you go because it's not worth it. So there's just a lot to that. And I know I'm not giving you the real answer of this is when you do it, but I think it's different when you go SEO or website maintenance
Yeah.
versus pay-per-click versus can they do everything? But I think at some point, whenever the business owner, I'll leave it on this. When a business owner gets so overwhelmed that they're spending, you know, I would call it, and again, this is a vague number, 35 to 45 or more percent of their time in marketing, they need
Mhm.
to find some type of
Yeah.
manager or fractional CMO to step in and manage that percentage for them so that they can focus on higher level and then only spend 15 to 20% on the marketing side.
Yeah, and I love that you bring that up because I know when I think about this, I think about it more on the execution side of things because that's just how I'm wired. Like my default is just I'm going and I'm just getting things done. And one thing that I've seen in marketing is that you really need two very different kinds of people. You need the analytical minded person who understands data and can really go through that and make decisions and really informed decisions based on all of that data. But then you also need a creative mind who can create compelling copy, who can speak to your audience's needs, who really understands that emotional and creative side of things. And finding one person who does both of those things very well is extremely difficult.
It's almost impossible because you're almost talking about left brain, right brain.
Yeah.
But there are a small select amount of people that can do both. And I would raise my hand and say, I can do both. But I am definitely more of the analytical side of here's the data, but I understand how to communicate that data, right? Now, if you asked me to design something, I would be terrible. I'm not great at that. I'm going to go look at examples and be like, this is the direction we should go. And then I hand it to a designer and say, go make this happen.
Yeah.
But I understand the strategy and what we're trying to do within that. So, I mean, we could talk so much about just what you said, right? Because I mean, there's like probably 10 bullet points that I could write down and go through with you on that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you're talking about these different mindsets. And again, that kind of goes back to the coder versus designer versus strategist. And what you're talking about, I'll leave it on this and we can move whatever direction you like. But when you're talking about the person that gets it done, now you're talking about the visionary versus the execution, right?
Mhm.
So as a fractional CMO, I understand what the execution should be and the process that if we are working together, I'm going to look at you and say, go execute. Here's the vision, but I understand how it should be executed and understand because of my background and experience and how long I've been doing it, which is over 20 years. I know I'm relatively young, but over 20 years, being in my mid 40s, there's something to say of I've seen how it's executed. So I've seen what project managers have done right and what they've done wrong and the best way to do it. And it doesn't mean that I can give or always dictate the best way because I'm always learning. But I can say, look, this is a pitfall, and I know you're going to fall into that pit if you do it this way. But you got to have that executor. And I'll tell you right now, as a fractional CMO, it's not my job to be an executor, and I don't want to do it. I want to stay in my lane. This is what I'm good at. And then I hire people around me that can do and execute what I either don't want to do or what I'm not good at.
Yeah. No, and that's, again, it, I, the more conversations like this I have, the more that I see it's just everything is so layered and interweaves so much together. Because again, as a business owner, it goes the same way that you're saying. Like business owners is a lot of times has to be the visionary, is the visionary, but so many, especially smaller ones, they're also trying to execute as well. And that's just not really sustainable. Like you have to be able to delegate a lot of that stuff off. And so one more question I wanted to ask you before we wrap up here. If anyone has been following us at Spotlight Branding for any amount of time, you're aware that we have like an anti-SEO report. We had like kind of this anti-SEO stance for a while. And not that we've tapered off of it, but our whole idea around it was, that's not where you start. You need a lot of supporting marketing to help make that sort of thing work better. But I know in our industry, especially the legal marketing industry, the majority of marketing companies out there, that's the service that they push first. And that's what, everyone says, oh, you got to do this. You got to have SEO. You got to make sure your rankings are optimized. Your ranking is. So for people who are going to try to add that to their marketing strategy, what is your approach to it when you're working with someone new, right? Like, do you go find a local company to do it? Do you find a national company to do it? Is it something that you even handle yourself talking about the execution side of things? Like where do you go with that sort of thing?
Yeah, so the first thing is understanding the core, and the core has really changed, and not a lot of people are aware of this. But if you think about, this is always a fun exercise, right? So everyone close your eyes and really process this. And I mean that in seriousness, because when you close your eyes, you get rid of distractions and you clear your brain, you take a deep breath. So if you close your eyes, you take a deep breath, here's what you think about. Think about how you did a search in 2018. How many words did you put into Google when you did a search? Now, today, when you've done a search, or you do a search after you listen to this or watch this, how many words do you put in? And on average, the words have more than doubled. And most of the words have transformed into language of how do I? So when you think about
Yeah.
it that way, what I first of all suggest is create phrases. And we created internally, I created what's called a bubble map of keywords. And the bubble map of keywords are built more around blogs of phrases that we want to rank for. And then we want to work on that angle of these phrases we want to rank for rather than a keyword, because a keyword can still get a lot of search volume, but a phrase gets a lower search volume. It's a longer tail, but it's a higher transactional keyword rather than a navigational or informative keyword, right? Which is
Yeah.
the desired content of the searcher. So, as a for instance, if you Googled fractional CMO, I don't show up in the top 100 of national ranking. But if you type in fractional CMO, Dallas, Austin, Houston, Oklahoma City, Salt Lake City, Boise, Denver, Miami, Hawaii, and I could go over 32 keywords that I rank in the top five,
Yeah.
if you use that term. And I know I've got CMOs out there that are chasing me because they want that word. And I look at it and go, you know what? I want someone that says local. So when you ask local or national, let me give you another quick story and a quick fact.
Yeah.
Most big brands, when they hire a CMO, they hire from outside, not inside. So chew on that, and everyone go do your research. Big brands hire from the outside, not in their industry, to bring them in their industry. So there's a double-edged sword to that. And the answer is, it's more about the KPIs and the relationship that you can build with the agency, and can they meet those KPIs, more than is it if they know your niche or don't. It's more about what do they do, because I don't specialize in one thing. I specialize
Right.
in a lot, because I'm looking at what do we want to achieve, and what are the KPIs, what are the measurable KPIs, and when we all agree on them, I don't miss that target. That's one thing I'm very confident. I don't miss targets. And if I do, it's not by much, because I'm watching along the way as the arrow goes towards the target, and I know how to redirect that arrow to get it to land where we want it to land, right?
Yeah.
So I think that answers your question in a little bit of a roundabout way, but it also gives a little bit more education as to keywords and where they've tailed off to.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for me, I think the biggest takeaway is just take the time to vet and set the expectations and really feel good about, who it is you're working for. Now, I will say this: people in our industry, they take a lot of time to make a decision. Like, don't draw it out to where you're starting to miss opportunities. Like, do your due diligence. Absolutely. Talk to different agencies and do all that. But, don't wait weeks and months at a time to where you start to forget these conversations that you had, and it becomes more of a recency bias sort of situation rather than that, getting the right solution from the information that you gathered.
Right. But on that, right, we're saying the same thing. Internally, set your KPIs, set your
Yes.
expectations internally first. Then when you interview the agency, pull the trigger. What today's market, they say hire fast, fire faster. So
Mm.
I hope this doesn't go against your philosophy, but I would say
No.
get those short-term contracts, get that 3 or 4 months. In my professional opinion, I look and I even do a 4-month engagement. And then after that, it's a 45-day cancellation. So they can get rid of me very quickly if they choose to, if I'm not hitting the cusp. And there are clients that I'll tell you right now that I will disengage with because either personality disagreement or vision disagreement or KPI being unrealistic. I'll back out and say, look, all due respect, I want you to go somewhere and spend your money where it's wise. So take off. You know what I mean? I'll make a smooth transition. I'll hand everything over. I'll make sure that everything's there. I'll answer your questions up to a point. But I'll say, this is what we got done. This is where we're at. Here's the handoff. Here's the baton. But yeah, set your KPIs, right? I mean, know what you want to achieve and what's realistic. Interview the person and move forward. Right.
Yeah. And more often than not, like, you still make progress. You still, get forward a little bit. And worst case scenario, you walk away with the knowledge of, hey, okay, this isn't for me. This doesn't work. I can go try something else now. And so, definitely, sitting around trying to think of a decision to make isn't helping. You got to make those fast decisions and learn something at the very least along the way. Before we wrap up here, tell everyone how they can get in touch with you, learn more, and also to check out the book that you mentioned.
Yeah, so my book is on my website, and I would encourage everybody to first Google Fractional CMO and put in your city that's near you. See if I show up. But my main website is JRcmo.com. So that's Josh Ramsey, Chief Marketing Officer.com. So JRcmo.com. On there, there's everything that you need. There's a book download. There's free information. I have the world's largest SEO library that I've compiled. It has somewhere over 160 different strategies that you can implement or research. I have just a ton of information. And then my call to action is I work with people for free. For at least the first 2 hours, I'll work with them for free to prove my knowledge, to prove that I have the experience, and to help them get the right vision. Because I do what Google wants to do for everybody, and that is create the best user experience. Because what I've proven to myself and a lot of people that I know, if I come in and give you the best user experience and show you my knowledge and everything that I have to give you, and I can point you on the right track, people come back. People will come back to me, learn from me, want to work with me. And I've seen that time and time again. I've picked up my biggest clients over the years just from that word of mouth of someone going, yep, that guy's good. Yep, that guy's got experience. Yes, that guy's is ethical and moral, and he's gonna be honest with you. So again, JRcmo.com is where the book is at, where other information is at. You can also, I think on my homepage, it says solve your biggest marketing headache. Although we do a lot of A/B testing. So you may show up and see it say 2-hour free consultation or solve your biggest marketing headache. But you can always contact any way through that website, and we'll get you set up with a meeting. So
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just sitting here and talking to you for the last 35 minutes or so, I can tell, your stuff, because there's so many different rabbit holes we could have gone down. I mean, this could have been a 7-hour conversation just covering all the different areas of marketing strategy. So,
I'm looking forward to coming back.
Oh yeah, we can absolutely make that happen. So one final question here before we end the show. If you had one final piece of advice for our audience, what would it be?
Man, again, that's so hard because everyone is so different. But I would say start with your narrative. Identify in your narrative what's worked well and what has failed you. Then I tell employees, and you can even use this with employees, I tell them, give me your 30-day, your 3 months, your 6 months, and your 1-year goal. And then go a little bit step beyond and give me your 5-year. And I think when you create this goal path, both for yourself, from your employees, from your agency, it starts to paint a picture of where you should go. And a lot of times we live today in a narrative of we make choices based on our past. And sometimes that's a fail point for us. So understanding the psychology of why we make decisions is really important. I feel like I should write a book about it. There's probably a book out there that I haven't found yet that's written about it. But it is psychologically based where we make decisions, we have arguments, we buy things, all based on our narrative. So understanding where you've been is just as important as where you're going and why you're going to make those decisions. So I guess I would probably, at least for this conversation, leave that as a focal point of really drawing out your narrative. And if you haven't ever looked this up, there's something, I think it's called the egg diagram or the egg chart. And you draw an egg, and in that egg, you write out the most impactful moments of your life. And you do it with a picture rather than a word. And you tell your story to someone that's close and confidential to you. But when I did that for the first time back in 2018, I think, or 2019, I mean, it blew my mind of the things I kept remembering. And I left it on my wall for 30 days. And it really helped me understand why I make decisions now from my birth and my first memory all the way up. And I think that can help both in business and in personal because they all interweave. And then you start to make better decisions based on understanding the hurts and the fail points, both in your personal life and in your business life, and understanding, again, trying to sum this up. You made a bad business decision. Why? Understand the why and the narrative of why you made that decision back down to when your business started. Therefore, you don't make that decision again. And I'm going to tell you right now, I still make those bad decisions, right? I look at it, I'm like, I should not have done that. But when you have that chart up in front of you, you can then remember that narrative and try to make better decisions. So hopefully that's maybe a good stopping point for us.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation to understand that as well.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. No, all of that just absolutely great. A lot of great insight. And I know that, I say this a lot. I know when I walk away learning things and with some new ideas, I know our audience gets a ton of value out of it as well. And so I really do appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you for continuing to listen. Please leave a rating and review wherever you're listening. If you have not done so yet, it helps the show grow and really is valuable to get that feedback from all of you out there. But that's going to do it. Thanks so much for joining us, Josh. Thanks again.
Thanks for listening. To learn more, go to spotlightbranding.com/center stage.